Yo, what's good everyone? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy channel, and in this video we are going to go over my top starts of the week for week 6 of the 2022 fantasy football season. I have a lot of players to talk about in this video. I feel like there's a few more than I usually have because I think there's a lot of players who got a boost in opportunity or have really good matchups this week, and there's one game in particular that I'm targeting as a game that has a lot of potential in it for fantasy purposes, and I like a lot of players in it. But before we get into any of that, please make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps, and it would be greatly appreciated. All right, we're going to go position by position, starting with quarterback. So my first start of the week is Kirk Cousins of my Minnesota Vikings. He's been pretty solid for fantasy this season. He doesn't offer any rushing upside, but as a passer, he's been pretty good this year. Obviously, week 2, a tough matchup against Philly. He didn't do great for in fact, he did horrible. You know, primetime Kirk against the only undefeated team. Good defense in Philadelphia on the road. We'll give him a pass for that one and for fantasy purposes. And then in New Orleans, that's a pretty tough matchup. But versus Green Bay, versus Detroit, and versus Chicago, all division rivals. But it makes sense that he'd do well against them because my Vikings do run this division. But in week 6, Kirk Cousins gets the Miami Dolphins. Long story short, guys, Kirk Cousins, he might not be someone you want to start every week, but in the right matchup, he can put up some big numbers, and that is exactly the scenario that he is looking at in week 6. The Miami Dolphins, their defense is not playing well at all. Their secondary is pretty dreadful. They're giving up a lot of points to the fantasy quarterback, and Kirk Cousins still has his weapons, one of which we are going to be talking about later in this video. So I love Kirk Cousins this week in fantasy. Next, we have Tom Brady of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And guys, he gets the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, and you might be scared of that matchup because you think of the Steelers, you think of the Steel Curtain, you think about Harrison running that touchdown back in the Super Bowl, you think about Polamalu jumping over the line. That is not what the Pittsburgh Steelers defense is anymore, ladies and gentlemen, okay? The Steelers are a good matchup for fantasy quarterbacks, and Tom Brady is a good quarterback. He's getting older, he's 45, he considered retiring, and he had a slow start to the season, so you might have thought, oh, he's washed. He's done. But can we just slow down a little bit here? He started on the road at Dallas, at New Orleans, and he was missing a lot of weapons. Chris Godwin was dealing with injuries to start the year, and Mike Evans did get suspended for this game against Green Bay. Week 4, he gets his weapons back. It's a nice high-scoring game with Kansas City. He puts up 25. And then last week versus Atlanta, he puts up almost 20 points in fantasy in whatever format Fantasy Pros uses. Week 6, he still has his weapons. And I think in a good matchup against the Steelers, Tom Brady is someone that you will want in your lineup. All right, I did not make Geno Smith a start of the week in week 4 when I was just about to do that. That was the week where he really burst onto the scene as like, hey man, this guy is a legit fantasy option. I did start him in week 4 against Detroit in one of my leagues. Granted, I did lose. It was a 2-quarterback league. I lost Dak. I played him, and he ended up doing great. Week 5, I did not make him a start of the week either because he was on the road in New Orleans, and he still had a great week for fantasy. Geno Smith is playing amazing. He's got the weapons as well with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And this game against the Cardinals at home, a game that we're going to be talking about quite a bit in this video, it's a great matchup. The Cardinals defense can't really stop anyone right now, and both offenses can score points. So remember that game at the beginning of this video that I mentioned I was going to talk about? This is that game, and it starts with Geno Smith. Obviously, I like Kyler as well, but I'm going to go with Geno here just to talk about him a little bit more because I just want to include him in one of my start of the week videos because this guy has been great for fantasy. He deserves his respect. And this could be the time when the shoe drops and it's a good matchup. He's been playing well, and all of a sudden the old Geno shows up because he's been a career backup, drafted pretty high, and it didn't really pan out for him. But you know what? Maybe he just figured something out. We'll have to see. But long story short, in week 6, I do like him quite a bit. And he does have big upside in this game as well. So I would put him in your lineup if you could, if you don't have one of those top tier elite options. And in a 2-quarterback league, like where I have him, he's in there. He's going to carry me, hopefully. I need to win in that league. Please, Geno, please. Now we're going to move on to the running back position with Rhamondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. So there's a couple things to break down here. In my opinion, Rhamondre Stevenson is a strong play regardless of if Damien Harris, his fellow running back in New England, whether or not he plays, okay? A while ago, I heard he was going to miss multiple weeks with a hamstring injury. Damien Harris is who I'm talking about here. But last I heard, he's questionable and he might play. I don't know how he goes from potentially missing multiple weeks to maybe playing as soon as, this week against Cleveland. But either way, I think Harris will be not at 100%, and Rhamondre Stevenson is a good play, even if Harris plays. A great play, actually, even if he plays. But if Damien Harris does miss, I think Rhamondre Stevenson is a must-start option. And if Harris does play, you probably still want to start Stevenson, because Stevenson has been great for fantasy. As you can see, even with Damien Harris playing, he has been seeing solid volume, especially the last 3 weeks. 12, 14, 25 carries, and 5, 2 targets. He's used in the passing game a little bit. 18, 11, 18 and a half points and half PPR. And it's the matchup, guys. Week 6 against the Cleveland Browns. It's one of the best matchups for running backs in all of fantasy football. So when you combine his usage, his talent, and the matchup, and then you add in the fact that he might be the only guy in this backfield, he is a borderline. I would say he's a must start. I mean, unless I can't imagine you're in a scenario where you're sitting Rhamondre Stevenson. For example, in one league, I have to decide between, I got like Cortland Sutton, Miles Sanders, DK Metcalf are kind of guys that I'm considering. Who do I play? I'm probably going to have to bench one of them if Tyreek Hill and Jonathan Taylor do play. But that just kind of goes to show like that's like how much I'm considering playing Rhamondre Stevenson. And Rhamondre is a lock for that lineup. So I'm going to be benching probably Cortland Sutton or maybe Metcalf. I don't know. But I got to get Rhamondre in this lineup because he is going to be so good for fantasy unless something crazy happens. So I love him in week 6. Now we're going to talk about Jeff Wilson Jr. I'm going to keep it pretty short and sweet here. The starter, Elijah Mitchell, has obviously been out for an extended period of time. He's still going to miss some more time. So Jeff Wilson should be the starter. He will be the starter in week 6, as he has been the last few weeks. And as you can see, he's been great for fantasy. In half PPR, he's been double-digit scoring every week. He's seeing a lot of volume on the ground. He's seeing a few targets here and there. He's scoring. And Tevin Coleman, you might be kind of scared off of Jeff Wilson because Tevin Coleman was involved last week, and I believe he did score a couple touchdowns. But Jeff Wilson is still the clear lead back, and he gets a good matchup with the Atlanta Falcons. So Jeff Wilson is someone that until Elijah Mitchell comes back, he is going to be good for fantasy, especially in a matchup like this with the Atlanta Falcons. Now we're going to talk about Kenneth Walker, running back of the Seattle Seahawks. So Rashad Penny is now out for the season with an injury. That means Ken Walker has this backfield all to himself. So against the Arizona Cardinals, it's not like they're bleeding points to the running back position, but I still wanted to bring him up in this video because he is someone that is seeing a huge boost in opportunity. He was probably one of the biggest waiver wire pickups of the year. And I think unless you have a really, really strong running back core or a really strong team in general where you can maybe start a wide receiver over him in a flex, I think he's someone that you can trust putting in your lineup. Now that Rashad Penny is not in the lineup, Ken Walker's volume should be pretty secure unless something weird happens. And again, I like this game in general. I think that there's some potential for a lot of points to be scored between Seattle and Arizona. Obviously, I'm making a lot of start calls from this game. There's one football, only one player can score every drive, so there might be someone who gets left out, but I think the opportunity is too great to not bring up Kenneth Walker, who's also a highly drafted running back. Running backs with his draft capital often get the opportunity, and they find success, at least for fantasy purposes. So I like Kenneth Walker as a nice solid start in week 6. And then on the other side of the ball in this same game, we have another guy who is going to presumably get the start. That, a starter that normally doesn't get to see the field too much. With James Conner and Darrell Williams both out for the Arizona Cardinals, Eno Benjamin should be the starting running back. And it's a good matchup against Seattle. So opportunity is a huge factor when it comes to the running back position. So I just wanted to bring him up. It's a good matchup against Seattle, and he is going to be the starting running back in a game that potentially could, there could be a lot of points scored. So I think Eno Benjamin is someone that maybe, you could try putting in your lineup if you don't have the strongest team. Maybe you pick them up off the waiver wire, and you can use them as a start this week. Now it's time to talk about wide receivers, and we're going to start with Adam Thielen of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, obviously, I'm not saying I'd rather start him over Justin Jefferson, right? When I make these videos, I'm not just trying to tell you the obvious calls. I'm trying to give you some guys that are, maybe not so obvious. Adam Thielen is someone that, at this point in his career, he's probably not someone you want to start every week. He always has the potential any week to get in the end zone, but he's someone that is going to have, his ups and downs, okay? But in week 6 against the Miami Dolphins, I do like him as a start. I already told you that I liked Kirk Cousins, and he does have to throw the ball to somebody. So Justin Jefferson will get his, but I think there is enough offensive production to go around in this game where Adam Thielen should be a solid start. Now, depending on the quarterback situation for the Dolphins, this could be a situation where the Vikings win pretty easily and don't have to throw the ball a bunch. So it really just comes down to how the game plays out. But in terms of, talent and opportunity and matchup, I think Adam Thielen has the potential to have a pretty good game for fantasy. And especially with his nose for the end zone, if this game turns out the right way and and he's used in a way that's good for fantasy, he could have a really, really good performance. So I do like Adam Thielen as a nice solid start in week 6. Now I'm going to talk about Devin Duvernay of the Baltimore Ravens. In terms of fantasy points allowed, the Giants are not really giving up a ton of points to wide receivers, but I still wanted to bring up Duvernay because matchup isn't everything in fantasy. I also like to go over guys who are getting boosts and opportunities, okay? Or players that, talented players that deserve some recognition, okay? So Devin Duvernay, he's been actually pretty solid for fantasy. It's not like he's being hyper-targeted or anything like that, but he's making the most with his touches. And in week 5, Rashad Bateman, fellow wide receiver for the Ravens, was out versus Cincinnati. We saw him get his season high in targets, 7 targets, and he also saw 3 carries on the ground. One of them was kind of like a broken play where the ball hit him while he was in motion, like the snap hit him, and then he picked it up and just ran around everyone for, I think that was probably this 12-yard gain right here. But he ended up with 10 points in fantasy. Against the Giants, like I said, they're not giving up a ton of points to wide receivers, but I still think it's worth bringing him up, okay? So, for example, I had Brandon Cooks on bye, so I was looking at having to start Darnell Mooney, and Darnell Mooney actually did have a decent game for fantasy. And if he would have caught that touchdown right after I took him out of my lineup on the last play of the game, I don't know what I would have done. I probably would have deleted all my leagues. But for example, I didn't want to start Mooney, so I did eventually trade for Jacoby Myers, so I am probably just going to roll with him. But I did pick up Devin Duvernay today, actually, because he was dropped after the initial waiver wire, so I wasn't sure by Thursday night if I was going to be able to pick up Duvernay or not. But I picked him up, and if I was not able to get Jacoby Myers, I would have started Duvernay in that spot. So, long story short, I'm not expecting him to be like a week winner, but if you're in a pinch, this is someone who is seeing a boost in opportunity with Rashad. I don't know if I mentioned this. Rashad Bateman is already ruled out for week 6. That's kind of the whole point here of me bringing him up, okay? So he should see a fair amount of touches and probably be decent for fantasy. All right, we're going to go back to that Seattle and Arizona game. We're going to talk about Marquise Hollywood Brown. He's been really good for fantasy, guys. He's been really good. I believe I made him a start of the week the first 2 weeks, and he did all right. And then I don't think I've made him a start since then. And he's been insane. He's been incredible. 140 yards, 88-1, 78-1. He's being targeted a lot. And in week 6, he gets the Seattle Seahawks, who, like I've said, they're a good matchup. It's not a good defense. And I expect there to be points scored. And above all, he's playing really well. DeAndre Hopkins is still not back from his suspension. And I think as the main target, he's a must start every week at this point. So I would put him in the lineup. He always has a big week winning ability just because he can make big plays. So yeah, I would try to get him in your lineup. He's probably in your lineup regardless, but I got to put him in here. I got to talk about him. He's been great. He deserves his recognition. So Hollywood, start him up. All right. We're going to talk about DK Metcalf in that same game. We're going to talk about DK Metcalf and his teammate Tyler Lockett. All right. Long story short, you've heard the spiel, the whole video. I like Geno. I like Kyler. They're going to throw the ball to people. DK Metcalf has been great for fantasy. I drafted him in 2 of my redraft leagues. I'm only in 2 redraft leagues, and I got him in both. I really liked his value, and I was a little nervous to start the season when he didn't do much for fantasy. But he played Denver and San Francisco. Those are very tough matchups for fantasy. 2 good defenses. Since then, he's played Atlanta and Detroit. It was good for fantasy. And then even against New Orleans on the road, in a tougher matchup, he did produce for fantasy. Geno is playing well. I don't know if it's going to last all season. I feel like Metcalf will have his weeks where maybe he's not the best, just because if Tyler Lockett gets his and Metcalf doesn't, see the same production, or if Geno Smith doesn't keep it up, it might stop. But until we see something happen where these guys aren't great, I'm gonna keep putting them in the lineup. So week 6, I like DK Metcalf, and then I like his teammate Tyler Lockett, who was kind of left for dead in draft season, but take a look at what he's done here. He's been incredible for fantasy outside of week 1. He's been double digits every week. Last week, he got in the end zone twice, over 100 yards, 25 fantasy points. I mean, what are we talking about? What are we talking about here? And again, against Arizona, I'm putting him in the lineup, bro. If you have Tyler Lockett, try your best to put him in the lineup because he's been good for fantasy. And as we saw last week and throughout his career, he can have these games where he wins you a week. So I would try to get them both in your lineup if you can. And then finally, we're moving on to tight end. And I'm sorry, maybe I'm being a little crazy for bringing up so many Cardinals and Seahawks. And I'm sure they won't all be great for fantasy because, like I said, there's one football. But I feel like you just have to start all these guys because of their potential. And Zach Ertz, out of everyone that I have mentioned, he is probably the player that I am most confident in at their position. So obviously I have to flex one. I'm not starting Zach Ertz over, Kenneth Walker or, Metcalf or something like that, right? Or Hollywood. Now watch, Zach Ertz will put up like 30 points. But he might do that, guys. That's what I'm saying. Against Seattle, this is like, even if I hated the matchup in general, I didn't think there were a lot of points scored, I would still tell you that Zach Ertz is a must-start tight end. Unless you have Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews, you pretty much have to start Zach Ertz. Maybe you could consider Dallas Goedert, but outside of that, I'm starting Zach Ertz. If Kyle Pitts plays, I'm starting Zach Ertz over Pitts. That is how much I like him this week. This matchup against Seattle, it's the best matchup for tight ends in all of fantasy. They are giving up so many points to the tight end position. It's a little ridiculous. So, and not to mention, he has been good for fantasy, okay? Like, this isn't just some touchdown-dependent bum. This is a guy who has been good for fantasy, and I expect him to be great for fantasy. Now, after this week, if he has a blow-up week, you might want to trade him because DeAndre Hopkins is going to be coming back from suspension, and that might affect the target share for Zach Ertz. But for week 6, ride with him, and if you want, you can maybe trade him, plus something else for a tight end upgrade or something like that. But this week, I love Zach Ertz. Now we're going to move on to our last start of the week, and that is George Kittle of the San Francisco 49ers, a tight end who I would not start over Zach Ertz this week, but I still would start over most options. Week 6, he gets Atlanta. Listen, he's had a bad start to the season. He missed the first 2 weeks with injury, and then weeks 3 through 5 when he's played, he's done pretty much nothing for fantasy. But he's one of these guys that you just put in your lineup. I mean, who are you going to play over George Kittle? Are you going to play like Robert Tonyan or something like that? Maybe if you have some other option, maybe you want to play him over Kittle. I wouldn't blame you, but I would give him one more week here. See what happens against Atlanta. It's a good matchup for tight ends. And we just want to see him do well for fantasy. I think he's a talented player, and he has shown the ability in the past to put up these week-winning performances. So in week 6, if he gets the work and if he does something with it in this good matchup, I think you will regret sitting him. If he doesn't do well for fantasy this week, it might be time to worry. But we'll see what happens. But I wouldn't stray away from George Kittle just yet, unless you have maybe Zach Ertz or someone like that. But I would try to stick with Kittle if you could. We are done with our starts of the week for week 6. Now it is that part of the video where we recap week 5. I'm going to try to keep it really quick here. My starts of the week at quarterback last week, Tom Brady. He had a nice game for fantasy, so that was a good call for us. And then Joe Burrow. He was a quarterback 1. A nice solid week against Baltimore for fantasy. And I do like to look at these. I like to do a little recap each week of the previous week, just so that we kind of can see what went well and what didn't go well. Another player that did go well, I did say to start Rhamondre, Stevenson, and Damien Harris last week against Detroit. Rhamondre ended up doing great for fantasy. He was a borderline running back 1, 18.5 fantasy points. And he's going to be a must start this week. And I believe Damien Harris actually got injured pretty early in this game. Yeah, he only had 4 attempts before he got injured. So obviously that call didn't work out, but give me a break here, guys. I could not have predicted that. Another bad call here, though, is one that was actually genuinely... I'm not going to say it was a bad call because I think the process was right. But James Robinson in a great matchup against Houston, I expected a bounce back game from him, and he just did not deliver. Just wasn't efficient, didn't get a ton of volume, and the team lost. And he's starting to lose some work to Travis Etienne. So that's something to monitor moving forward. In Dynasty, I sat him each of the first 3 weeks when he did great. And then I started him the next 2 weeks where he has done nothing for fantasy. So that's a little bit annoying. But at wide receiver, I said to start Mike Evans, who he had an okay game. 4 for 50, 10.1 points. Didn't do anything too crazy, but didn't kill your lineup either. He's probably a must start every week anyways. And also Chris Godwin, who had a pretty pedestrian game. Nothing like, weak losing, not a complete bust, but this is definitely not what we were hoping for in that matchup against Atlanta from the Buccaneers wide receivers. Other than that, I recommended T. Higgins, who, that did not work out because he aggravated his injury. I believe he goosed, if I'm not mistaken. And then Jamar Chase. Also, he's been a little slow to start the season here. Jamar Chase, 8.5 points. I think he's a buy low right now if you can get him. But yeah, that did not work out for so the wide receiver calls last week were a little bit rough. But don't worry, guys. Week 6, we're gonna be perfect. It's gonna be absolutely fine. Oh, and I almost forgot at wide receiver. I did also recommend Olave. That was our best call. Luckily, he did get in the end zone. If he didn't do that, it would have been pretty rough. But he finished as wide receiver 16.5 PPR. 13.4 points. So he's been solid. Did he get injured in that game? I can't remember if he left early with an injury. I believe he did. If not, my apologies, but I'm pretty sure that happened. And then Dallas Goedert was my other start of the week. He's becoming an auto start at this point. I almost played Hayden Hurst in a DraftKings lineup. I wish I would have. Dang it. But Dallas Goedert was my start of the week last week. 8 for 95. I questioned coming into the year if he'd see the target volume, but he's been, even when he's not targeted a lot, he's just very efficient with his targets, and he's been great all season. He had 13.5 fantasy points, was the 5th tight end on the week, so that was a good call for us for week 5. All right, we did the starts of the week. We recapped our starts of the week last week. With that being said, that is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel for more fantasy football content. You want to stay up to date with everything that's happening. There's always stuff going on, so make sure you subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later. Good luck in week 6. Peace out.